This is the last in my series of vignettes in reminiscence of Mr. Dev Anand, whose 100th birth anniversary falls today, which is September 26th. I knew Mr. Anand from 1984 right until his death in 2011. It was a long association, friendship, whatever you want to call it. I first met Mr. Anand in 1984 when he was 61, which in Devanand years would be early 20s, I suppose. He wore a blue gabardine shirt, a black corduroy trousers. There was a flaming orange scarf wrapped around his neck. He stood in the doorway to his Navketan Films office in an area called Khira Estate, Santa Cruz, in Bombay those days. He stood with his hands akimbo and had his signature toothless smile on his face. As I reached the top of the staircase, he looked at me and said, "You are young, Mayank." For the record, I was 23, so I suppose I was young. It sounded as if he was relieved that I was young, and I found it quite amusing. Before the first meeting, I had spoken to Mr. Anand a couple of times on the phone, one of which had such a refreshing Devanand whimsy attached to it. The Sikh separatist leader, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, had just been killed in an operation called Operation Blue Star, and I was seeking reactions from some prominent figures of the city. Devanand was, of course, one of them, and it helped that he hailed from Punjab. I called his residence Iris Park in Juhu. The first call was answered by an aide of his who said something which could mean any number of things in the context of a Hindi movie star, except what it really means. The aide said, "Saab abhi bathroom mein hai, ready ho rahe hain," meaning he's in the bathroom and getting ready. Since I was on a deadline, I called again 5 minutes later. This time, another man answered with a distinctively stressed hello, which sounded like hello. Perhaps half of India would have recognized that voice instantly. It was Devanand and my first ever conversation with him. I could hear water flowing in the background. I told him who I was and explained the purpose of my call. "Mayank, can I call you back in 15 minutes? I'm in my shower," he said, and actually held the receiver of his telephone close to the shower head to prove that he was telling me the truth. He told me to leave my number rather with his aide. That's another thing with movie stars. They generally do not return your calls. That's just their way of saying that they would never call you back. Some 20 minutes later, I received a call from Mr. Anand. He gave me a brief reaction to the Bhindranwale death and ended it saying, "Let's meet sometime." We met several times after that over the next quarter century or so that I knew him. The last being, I think it was in 2010 on my last visit to Bombay. There are so many stories to tell, but for this particular reminiscence, I would recite just 3 of those. During my first interview, we spent nearly 2 hours together in his charmingly unkempt office, during which he did not sit down for a moment. Barely 3rd year into my career as a journalist, I considered it rather becoming to ask insolent questions of important people, one of which was, "Mr. Anand, would you have more talent or enthusiasm?" The impudence of the question was not lost on someone who had already been an iconic movie star for close to 4 decades by the time I posted. The only sign that this otherwise remarkably classy gentleman was discomfited by my effrontery was evident in the way he took 2 brisk rounds of his desk and said, "I'm as talented as anybody else." It's entirely a measure of Mr. Anand's character that he did not let my first encounter with him stand in the way of what turned out to be a long friendship or association, whatever you might want to call it. During the first interview, I tried to dwell on themes which I thought other journalists, mostly specializing in Hindi cinema, and I was a hardcore news reporter, were not at all curious about. Flamboyance was Devanand's default temperament, and I saw an opening there. Since by that time it was more a conversation than an interview, I said something to this effect. "It would seem, Mr. Anand, that you use your flamboyance as a shield to keep most of the world out. They are so taken in by your flamboyance and charisma that they do not bother to look beyond it." He had a fountain pen in his mouth as he looked at me and then through me. He then drummed his desk with his pen as if harmonizing what he was about to say, and then said, "That's an unusual question, an unusual theory, but I'm not going to discuss that now, maybe someday later." We never did. Another question I remember vividly was his views on friendship. And his reply I thought was quite remarkable. He said, "Everybody is a buddy, but nobody is." Many of you might know that Devanand and his gifted younger brother, the director, actor, and writer Vijay Anand, made several hits together. In fact, Devanand did some of his best work with Vijay Anand, whom he called Goldie. However, after a period of time, they just stopped working together, which incidentally coincided with a distinct decline in the quality of Devanand's films and work for the better part of the last 3 decades of his career. I had asked him once why he would not consider doing a project with his brother again. His response was both deeply affectionate and yet facetious. "Goldie mota ho gaya hai," meaning Goldie has gained weight, as if that affected his gifts as a writer and director. In a recent interview with Amit Khanna, a celebrated lyricist, producer, director, and movie industry pioneer who worked with Devanand for decades, I had asked him about the 2 brothers. And this is what he said. But before I play that, I want to conclude my tribute to Mr. Anand by just smiling. He was a remarkably effusive, classy, warm human being who did have starry airs in a way that you wouldn't think they were starry airs. He was just self-absorbed in a rather charming way. In fact, I also told him once that even if he had not been a movie star, he would still be as charismatic as maybe perhaps say a sorting clerk in a post office, which, by the way, he did for a while in the military census office during the British Raj. So here is to Mr. Devanand. But I mean, my sense while talking to Mr. Anand about this particular aspect was that I think they had perhaps it has run its course. And he even joked when I asked him, Mr. Anand in his characteristic style said, "Goldie bota ho gaya hai." So
I think the problem really happened when Goldie Saab went away to Rajneesh's ashram.
I see. Okay.
So there was a bit of a break.
Yeah, okay.
and though we got him back to do Bullet,
Yeah.
I persuaded Dev Saab to go, and that's when that was 25 years in Navketan. And to celebrate that, we said, let's get all the three brothers to make a film simultaneously. So Chetan Saab made a Janeman. After many years, he came back to Navketan, and then Goldie Saab made Bullet. But he was never the same person what he was.
Right.
Although he went on to make Ram Balram and Rajput and a couple of other films, but I think he was not what he was till he went to that
True. So
ashram.
that changed him. That's true.
Yeah.